Welcome to all of you to this session of EPG Pathshala. My name is Dr. Ketki Ranade. I work with the School of Social Work at TISS Mumbai. Today I will be talking about a specific module on sexuality and mental health, which is part of the larger course on mental health. So we can begin with the what is going to be the course sort of outline. In this module, what we will try and do is we will try and touch upon some basic ideas about human sexuality and what we mean by sexuality, what we mean by sexuality, how it connects up with our sense of self, our sense of relationships, and then how it relates to our sense of well-being and mental health. So that is what we will be covering in this module. We will also try and understand what are some of the barriers, challenges in developing of a healthy sexuality and ways in which that can impact mental health. In that sense, we will be looking at specific social factors, social structures, the idea of moral panics, the idea of moral policing that we have seen increasing quite a lot, both in our sort of popular culture, in popular media, social media and so on. So we will try and look at some of these and how they can impact sort of our understanding of normative and healthy sexuality, and we will also look at how that impacts mental health. So that's broadly what we'll be covering in the next about 20 to 25 minutes. We can begin with sort of understanding this idea of sexuality. Sexuality has been defined by various scholars as the capacity of individuals to have sexual feelings, a person's sexual orientation, sexual preferences, as well as sexual activities. Sexuality doesn't begin or end with sexual intercourse. Now what that means is that sexuality is a far larger idea which goes much beyond the specific sexual act or a specific sexual behavior. When we say that sexuality is defined in terms of capacities for sexual feelings, a person's orientation and preference, what we mean is that sexuality is far something that goes beyond a sexual act, but it also is about a part of an individual's self. So in that sense, a person's sexual orientation refers to a part of the self of the individual, which is the sexual self, as it were. So sexuality doesn't begin or end with sexual intercourse. It is not about a sexual act. It includes fantasies, it includes body image, it includes pleasure, it includes touch, desires, expressions, and much more. What this means again is that it goes far beyond sexual acts, but also things that people do in their heads. That's part of fantasy. It also means how people look at themselves, how people look at their own bodies, and so body image is a very important part of sexuality as well. Pleasure, touch, desires, sexual expression, and certainly sexual acts, all of these encompass the idea of sexuality. It governs certain behaviors towards others, our attitudes towards life, as well as social relations. So sexuality is also about who you are attracted to, but it's also about, it also sort of indicates what is the kind of perspectives, values, sort of a moral position that you have vis-a-vis sexuality, not just of yourself and what sexual acts you engage with, but also with respect to sexuality in society around us. So it would include your perspectives and views on things like whether people should be allowed to have sex before marriage, whether it is okay for people to have sex outside of marriage, whether it's okay for people of the same sex to be together sexually. So in that sense, sexuality is also about attitudes that you might have about sexual activities of other people as well. It is also closely intertwined with the ways we negotiate with values and social beliefs. Like I said right now, any given society would have its norms and normative ideas about sexuality, and when we are saying understanding human sexuality, it means each individual's sort of take or perspective on the normative as well as that which is seen as outside of the normative. So that's our sort of broad understanding of sexuality from where we begin. This quote which says the reality is that we talk about sexuality while not talking about it. What this means, of course, is that somehow the idea of sex and sexuality shrouded with a great deal of sort of moral panic, silences, shame, and so on, because of which it is actually true that we as a society talk quite a lot about sexuality and also often quite obsessed and think a lot about sexuality while we claim to not speak about it at all. So parallelly you have have governments clamping down on any kind of sex education drives and campaigns, which is to say that let's not talk about sex. By talking about sex, we are introducing these ideas to our young people, and this will mean that everyone will now go out and start having sex and start experimenting. So on one level, we have this moral panic that let's not talk about this, and by not talking about it, somehow we can wish it away, and that nobody will engage in sex, and everyone will be virgin until they get married, and only after marriage they will have sex with their partners, and in order to be able to produce babies and healthy children. So while we have those kinds of ideas because of which we promote not talking about sex, at the same time, if we look at just how we engage in society, right from the kind of consumption and the kind of show that we now see about around weddings, around anniversaries, around children being born and then their birth naming ceremonies and all of that. While as a society we celebrate all these things and we invest a lot in these ideas, we almost seem to indicate that we're not talking about sexuality, whereas actually when we're talking about marriage, we're talking about anniversaries, we're talking about children being born, we are talking about sexuality in all of this. Apart from this, when we are each and every, if one were to just look at advertisements that are right now going on in film, in television, or if one were to look at the print media, you would look at the way in which sex is sold while you're selling cigarettes, or you're selling clothes, or you're selling goggles, or you're selling cosmetics. So in that sense, this quote that we as a society keep talking and constantly keep talking and thinking about sex while we don't actually talk about it, in the sense that we don't talk about it in an open, scientific a manner. So then what happens in a society like this? Where is access to information around sex and sexuality? One of the things that we know from research studies and from literature is that one of the commonest access where people have to talk about sex and information is through peers, is through people who are of your age. So particularly around puberty, when interest in there is bodily changes that are happening, and hormonal surges that are happening, and sexual interests increase, which is actually almost a near universal phenomenon. Of course there would be exceptions, but and by that I mean that there would be people who even with puberty might experience asexuality, that is people who don't experience a sexual surge and so on. So there would be also those people, but almost nearly a universal phenomenon that almost all young people experience a surge in sexual interests and wanting to sexually explore. At this point of time, the primary access of information, because we live in that sense a sex negative world where it's not okay to talk about sex in a scientific, open manner, the primary access to information then becomes people who are like you, that is your peers, who are all also interested in similar questions and who are also trying to find answers and information. Now where do these peers go for information? One is, of course, they talk to each other and transmit a whole bunch of information that they get from mass media, from the internet and from the web, that they might get also from other kinds of medias like television shows, movies, music, videos, etc., etc. So all of this information that is gathered from these various kinds of medias then gets circulated amongst peers, and also people access these various medias. Pornography is again another big place where young people go to look for any kind of questions that they might have, curiosities that they might have about sexuality. And often, and what we see again with pornography or most of this kind of media that does openly talk about sex, all of this is done with a certain kind of, under a shroud of shame, and under this knowing fully that somehow this information that you're trying to seek is something that is something to be ashamed about and something to be kept away from respectable adult conversations at home. So all of this, usually whether it's conversations with peers, going on the internet, looking at movies, television shows, etc., all of this is happening in one a secret kind of a manner. That's the way in which information often is accessed. Then maybe there are some people who are lucky enough to have access to more scientific kind of self-help books and information channels which provide information in a body positive and sex positive manner, which is to say that that they provide information first in a scientific manner, which talks about diversity of human sexuality, which has enough place for talking about different kinds of sizes, different kinds of body shapes, without talking about these in a shaming sort of a fashion. So self-help books, other kinds of sort of literature on sexuality, if people have access to. Sometimes it is, as I said earlier, it's just various kinds of media. So apart from the visual and audio media, there might also be print media. So maybe magazines and some newspaper articles. There are some pornographic magazines as well, where people might go and look for this kind of information. In a few cases, rarely, access to information to sex might be available through actual conversation with parents, or through other kinds of adults, sort of significant adults, aunts, uncles, maybe older friends, cousins, and so on, where conversation about or what can be called as age appropriate conversation about sex and age appropriate delivery of information about sex may be possible. In really rare cases in the Indian context, we see that access to information to young people about sex also comes from sex education, which may happen sometimes in schools, or it may happen in different sort of extracurricular activities that people might be involved with in other kinds of classrooms and sessions that people might be undertaking for, say, personality development, relationship understanding, etc. So those are some of the places where you might hear about sex. So having talked about how sex can actually be really an all-encompassing, in many ways sexuality can be something that is about a person's life, and that is not just about a person's life at the time of puberty or at the time of marriage or at the time of reproduction, but sexuality is something that is like a lifelong, like a life course sort of a thing with a person. We will sort of also look at intersections of sex and sexuality with other aspects of human development. So the first intersection that I talk about is intersection with gender. This is to say that most people are as soon as they are born, one of the things that happens when a child is born is, even before, often the relatives will ask the question about the health of the mother and the child, and the well-being of the child, whether the child is in any kind of distress after the birthing experience. Often one of the first things that gets asked is this a boy or a girl? So in that sense, deciding the sex of the child based on the external genitalia of the child, then it is said that this is a boy or a girl. So from that moment on, a gender script is decided and a gender is assigned to an infant. So in that sense, it is even one would actually look at gender being assigned or sort of talked about, this gender script being present even pre-delivery. So you have parents talking about whether they're going to paint the room pink or blue, depending on if they already know sex of the child, or relatives already wanting to buy gifts, whether they're going to buy a doll or what else are they going to buy, depending on the sex of the child. So in that sense, gender script is a sort of a fairly central script that every human being grows up with. And gender, in many ways, the gender script is very closely linked with the sexuality script. So just as every person assigned female at birth grows up to being a girl and has certain norms around how she wears her hair, what kind of clothes she wears, what kind of play would she engage in, what kind of playmates would she have, what is appropriate sort of clothing, makeup, jewelry, etc. for her. Alongside that, there are messages also about the sexual script, that is, what is the appropriate sexual interest for this person. This is what I talk about as sex, sexuality and gender being sort of almost inseparable from each other, and therefore sort of sex, sexuality, gender, and by that I mean sexual identity, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender orientation, all of these being sort of very, very closely linked with each other. So this is to say that a child is born, external genitalia has certain kind of external genitalia, therefore it is decided that this is a boy, that's the determination of sex. Then the boy has to grow up in a particular way, that's the determination of gender, and that's how the sort of story goes to developing into a fully masculine male who's of course heterosexually inclined. So that's sort of the link between sex, sexuality and gender. The next intersection that we will look at is intersection between sexuality and relationships. So sexuality clearly impacts the kinds of relationships that one would form. There is clearly sort of emergence of sexuality and therefore interest in opposite sex or same sex that will determine the kinds of sexual romantic relationships that a person forms, but also determines in many ways the kind of social friendship circles that a person would have. Again, going back to the sex gender script, that girls are expected to grow up, and as they're growing up, particularly pre-puberty and puberty, it is very important that they have playmates, same-sex playmates. So girls will form these girl sort of groups, and they will together play certain kinds of games, and boys will form these boy groups and play certain kinds of games. Now, if girls were to show overt interest in boys, particularly during puberty, then that's frowned upon, and vice versa. So sexuality in many ways also impacts the kind of social friendship circles that people are expected to or allowed to engage in. So similarly, sexuality will also determine the relations with peers, parents. Parents also sort of a similar idea that the sex gender script is so strong that particularly around puberty, relationships and sort of intimate expressions of love, affection, etc. is censored vis-a-vis even parental relationships. So for example, when a girl grows up and is sort of in a post-pubertal age, the kind of interaction that she can have with her father, or the kind of interaction she can have or should be allowed to have with her brothers or cousin brothers, in some ways is sort of censored. She already has a script to say that now she's supposed to maybe not sleep in the same bed as her father, and so on. So in that sense, relationships with peers, parents, siblings, colleagues are all in many ways, as well as relationships with strangers, are impacted by your sexuality. So with respect to strangers, again, like I said, the sex gender script would be so strong that you know, if you're alone at home at 11 p.m. in the night, and if the doorbell would ring and there is a woman on the other side of the door, possibly if you're a woman, you will find a certain kind of comfort in being able to open the door and engage with her. Whereas if there is an unknown man on the other side of the door, then you would have you know, your antennas up, because again of the sex gender script, which also there is an embedded idea of violence within these scripts. So in that sense, sexuality would determine relationships in a big way, not just who you have sex with, but also your social relationships, as well as social romantic relationships and so on. The other intersection that I talk about with sexuality is that of body image. And so I said in the beginning that sexuality is much more than sexual acts. It is in fact much more than what you think and how you feel about other people. It is also about how you feel about yourself. So sex and sexuality is also about your own body, how you see your own body, which is called as body image. And there is a great deal of interesting research in the area of social psychology that looks at how body image is very much determined by socially prevalent notions of what is seen as desirable body, what is seen as ideal body, and so on. So the understanding of body image that we grow up with, in many ways shapes, is sort of linked with sexuality and also linked with your idea of self-image. So perceptions regarding body image develop through inputs from various sources. Like I said, ideas about ideal shape, right size. Again, you would hear some of these anxieties, and I think that especially among young people who unfortunately do not often have access to scientific information about sex, sexuality, etc. Sort of anxieties and angst about right size, particularly of primary, secondary sexual organs, but also right size with respect to overall, you know, body weight, body image, etc., are very important ideas that affect sort of sexuality, gender, self-image, etc. Not just with respect to body shape and these kinds of ideas, but also in terms of you know, the kinds of clothes that you wear and what is seen as sexually attractive, which is determined in many ways by social norms about attractiveness, but also by sort of market, the kind of brands that exist, and so on. For men particularly, because we do talk about body image quite a lot in the context of women and women's developing body images, but also now there is a lot of research on masculinity and body image, and sort of newer products for men to look fairer, to have have some specific creams which are meant for men and separate kind of creams for women, etc. So all of these are examples of how, so that thing that I said earlier, while we don't talk about sex, we talk about sex all the time. So these are all various examples of how our idea of sexuality, body image sort of intersects with a larger, wider social script around the desirable body and desirable sexuality. Then I move on to also talking about what I refer to as stigma and violence around sexuality. There seems to be multiple kinds of silences and shame that is associated with sexuality. Stigma in the area of sexuality is also quite big. What that often does is, one of the things it does is it leads to many half-truths and misconceptions around the area of sexuality itself. I'm going to read out a quote by Eve Ensler. Eve Ensler is this famous feminist writer who has written this play called Vagina Monologues. So I'm going to quote her where she says that that she grew up believing that masturbation causes cancer, but it feels good, so I do it, but I say I never do. So this is Eve Ensler's sort of from this monologue, which says that these various misconceptions that might be there about certain natural bodily functions. Another woman who talks in her TED Talk series, she says that I thought the woman dies while giving birth to a baby. That's the level of lack of knowledge that you might have about sexuality. So I thought that the woman dies while giving birth to a baby. I thought it tears open the stomach and comes out. It scares me to death thinking I will have to die like that. So these are sort of just a few examples of when we do not openly talk about sexuality, what are the kinds of half-truth misconceptions with which people live, because of which there would be people might live with mortal fear, to shame and guilt about their own bodies and about sexuality. Finally, I look at prejudice and moral policing around sexuality and the various kinds of violence that can lead to. So violence against all kinds of sexual expression, we all know about sort of many sort of public campaigns that have been carried out. One very infamous one is the Valentine's Day campaign, where you've had several politically right-wing groups who would stage these protests outside of common venues where young people meet, and they would shame the couple who possibly is sort of have exchanged some kind of a greeting card or maybe a rose or some token of affection. So these couples would be shamed. They would be asked to sort of tie a rakhi to each other, or they would be asked to engage in other kinds of sort of behaviors like punishments of various kinds would be imposed on these kinds of couples. There have been other kinds of many instances of moral policing that we have seen around us. Love Jihad campaign, then you have recently the Romeo Brigade in Uttar Pradesh that we heard about. So these are various examples. There is the Mangalore pub attack that was talked about in 2008 by Sri Ramasene. This is a group again that went into a pub. It's a private property where people were sitting, young people were sitting together having conversations. They entered here in the afternoon and shamed the women, called them anti-India, called them anti sort of the pious image of Indian woman, etc. And sort of this was also flashed all over on social media and public media. So these are all examples of the kind of violence and that can ensue when young people express their sexuality. Similarly, people running away from homes, marrying sort of interreligious, intercaste, are all examples of sort of breaking the sexual taboo and the kinds of violent consequences that some of this would lead to. The other element of sexuality and violence that I'd like to talk about is when sexual violence happens. So when you have a woman who has been, say, sexually assaulted. One of the things that happens is because of the way we see, because of our ideas about sexuality and chastity that are sort of so rigidly embedded in our social consciousness, that often you might have people who have, women particularly who have had sexual assaults, may not come forward to be able to register a complaint because they're expecting that their character will be doubted. So that's sort of the double-edged sword sword of how violence and sexual stigma sort of operate together. All of this, of course, what this does is it hinders any kind of help seeking or any kind of particularly in instances of sexual assault and violence, seeking help from the police, legal mechanisms, seeking justice, as well as seeking basic medical attention for the sexual assault and violence that might have taken place, and seeking help from mental health professionals or from any kind of therapists and counselors. So this is sort of looking at the double-edged nature of sexual stigma and violence and how that can affect individuals. So I've already spoken a little bit about moral policing, sexual violence. We have talked about silence around sexuality and a shaming language that is there around sexuality. What we see therefore is the next thing that I'm going to talk about is absence of sort of affirmative and socially acceptable kind of language and conversations around sexuality. So which often what this means is that in the absence of any kind of affirmative language to talk about sexuality, people might find it difficult to engage with sexuality in a positive manner. So as we can see, difficulty also arises in articulating the feelings of certain kinds of experiences that people might want to talk about. So if people want to talk about a positive sexual experience, often that language is lacking. So language of sexuality is often in the form of shaming, slut shaming, etc. The complicated issue in the absence of language and with so much of silence around sexuality is the whole issue of consent. Consent to be able to have sex. So as has been pointed out by several sort of scholars, that actually to think that if there is no language to be able to give consent or to be able to say yes to sex, in the absence of being able to have a language to talk about yes, it's almost impossible to think of how people will learn to say no. So it's in the absence of sort of a positive language where people have a sense of being able to describe that this is what they would like to do sexually. When they don't have that, how are we expecting that people will have the language to talk about violence and being able to say no? What is the kind of sex, or who are the people or the circumstances where they want to say no to sex? So in that sense, the issue of consent gets complicated in the absence of an affirmative sort of sexual language. Lack of dialogue on sexuality can generate, overall it can generate several distorted ideas. So what we started out by saying that lack of access to information around scientific sort of manner of understanding sexuality can really lead to many distorted ideas about body, about what is a good sexual experience, about several of these kinds of ideas. Finally, what I come down to is talking about mental health and sexuality. So all through this, while we've been talking about sexuality is a very important component of development of identity, development of self. I'm just going to summarize by looking at mental health and sexuality. Physical, emotional, intellectual and bodily transformations that occur within a person creates curiosities, confusions, emotional chaos and many questions that need answers. So all of this, in the absence of having affirmative spaces to talk about these, can actually have an impact on sort of daily life and emotional world and behaviors of people. Issues around body image, gendered socialization, processing information relating to menstruation, emotional upheavals that are associated with relationships, breakups and so on, information and experiences regarding sex and sexual behavior tend to have a great impact on the subjective well-being of a person. So if we have to be able to think of mental health and well-being, an integral aspect of that is sort of having the ability to talk about sexuality in a healthy and affirmative sort of a manner. So finally, as a way forward, I think what is necessary is to generate a healthy discourse around sexuality, sensitize and conduct interventions with individuals at all levels of the system involved in the process of socialization as well as social support. I'm going to end with a quote by Martha Nussbaum, who says that vulnerabilities like love, desires and being in a phase of life where individuals are trying hard to grasp the unwritten rules of social being need to be supported and not turn into sources of constant daily agonizing and uncertainty. And with this, I will sort of conclude saying that we have in this session looked at sexuality and mental health. We have said that sexuality and healthy sexuality is an integral part of mental health. Sexuality is far more than sexual acts. We've also looked at how conversations around sexuality are often silenced and sort of shrouded in darkness because of shame associated with it. But we've also talked about the need for an affirmative dialogue on sexuality as it intersects with various aspects of our lives, right from our sex and gender and relationships to sort of healthy mental health of a person. So that's where I will conclude, and thank you.